Right, can you hear me? Can you hear the mic? Yeah. All right. So what I found in the afternoon is rather than giving a talk, we just open up for Q&A, because then we can get to what people actually want to talk about. So we have an hour, and I've got to get back to Berrien Springs tonight. So I did it last week. I need to get it back tonight. I head out again on Tuesday or Wednesday for my next trip, so I don't spend much time at home. So time at home is like gold. So when you ask your question, don't preface it with a mini dissertation or anything. Just ask the question, okay? And that's fair on everybody, okay? And then just ask the question as simple as you can, and I'll try and give you a short, sweet, and simple answer as I can, recognizing that this is live, it's online, will be used against me. So if I come across as extremely tactful this afternoon, normally when we have a Q&A, it's offline and it's not being recorded, but today it is being recorded and it's being streamed. So we may be a bit constrained in what we can say. So with that caveat in mind, so we have an hour, we'll just open it up for questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand and then we can get underway. Well, I'll be heading back to Michigan then. Yes, okay, brother here.
What's the most pressing thing that you answer in Q&A?
Oh, that's a good question. What's the most pressing thing that I answer in Q&A sessions? The most pressing thing I answer is the GC going to withdraw their statement, the reaffirmation statement that strips us of our religious liberty? And the answer, as far as we can see right now, is no. They're not going to strip it, they're not going to set it aside. I've written to them and said, look, the context of the issue in the context of the pandemic. The pandemic is over, therefore the context no longer applies. A face-saving exit view is just to say the context no longer applies, we're setting it aside. That would be the face-saving exit for everybody without admitting liability. If they admit that they don't have the right to ADCOM to strip you and I of our religious liberty, which I don't think they have, if they admit that they don't have that right, then everybody who's lost their job or been thrown out of university or lost their home or lost a custody battle, whatever it is, because of that statement, is going to be in a class action lawsuit. And that's not going to be good for the GC. So they can't admit they didn't have the authority. So it's not going to come down anytime soon unless there's massive pressure brought by the members worldwide. And there's no mechanism in the church for the members to for a redress of grievance. It just doesn't exist. And so we're kind of stuck. The only thing we can do is pray and ask God for a change of heart among our church leaders, and pray that they will change their convictions and realize that they don't have the right to strip every member worldwide of their religious liberty at the touch of a button. So that's the short, sweet, and simple answer to your question, brother. Yes. Yeah. All right. Another question? Yeah, sister. All right, so there are two questions there. One's relating to my wife. One is, how does the church relate to totalitarian regimes? Okay, on the first one, my wife was not raised a Christian. She was raised in the Soviet Union. If you go back about 5 generations, she comes from the Orlov family. They were dukes and duchesses, and they were friends of the Tsar. After the Bolshevik Revolution, her extended family lost large estates in Ukraine, lost thousands of head of horse and cattle. People died. And so they know in the 70s and 80s what it is to fear the knock at the door from the secret police, where you're just disappeared, never to be seen again. When communism collapsed, many Adventists from America traveled across the former Soviet Union as lay missionaries. They did evangelistic series all through the former Soviet Union. You know, when doors of opportunity arise, we should take them. And you don't know how long those doors are going to be open for. So many people went, they did evangelistic series across the former Soviet Union. My wife was about 14 then. She went to one of those and gave her life to Jesus and became an Adventist. But, you know, she went to college in Azerbaijan, which is a Muslim country. It was culturally Shia. And, you know, she's a female going to, you know, a Muslim university dominated by Muslim professors. It wasn't easy for her. And so a very common thing is for exams to be scheduled on the Sabbath precisely to trip the Sabbath keepers up. So her last exam was on the Sabbath in her last year, and the professor said, well, I know you're an Adventist, so I'm going to schedule the exams for the Sabbath. So you're going to fail, and I know you're going to retake the whole school year, hoping the next year the exam will be on Sunday through Friday. And so my wife said, yes, I'm going to be in church on the Sabbath. So she went to church, didn't sit the exam, and on the Monday, when the exam results were posted, she had the top grade. And she doesn't know how that happened. Maybe an angel worked for her on the Sabbath, I don't know. But she passed her exams with flying colors, even though she didn't actually take the exams. So, these things kind of happen out there. And her life is divided into BC and AD, before Conrad and Year of Her Lord. So we've been married now for 22 years, 23 years in December. So yeah, it's a real blessing. Now, your second question relates to how does the church relate to totalitarian regimes? And I think it's important that we recognize that whenever the church faces authoritarian or totalitarian regimes, those in leadership positions are placed in an almost impossible decision-making process. And time and again, we have to preserve our message, we have to engage in mission, and we want to preserve our institutions. Those are our three, generally our priorities: our message, to be true to our message, to engage in mission, and to preserve our institutions. But when we're faced with totalitarian regimes, the history of Adventism, I mean, in 1914-18, World War I, in Britain, the Adventist Church says we're non-combatant. We have a position of conscientious objectors. And my great-grandfather spent World War I in a hard labor camp in Britain because he wouldn't bear arms to fight in World War I. In Germany, the church said we will encourage our men to join up and fight with the Kaiser Wilhelm's armies, and encourage our members to work in munitions factories on the Sabbath to help the war effort. And many Adventists rejected that, and they left. There was a split, and that became known as the Reformed Seventh-day Adventist Church. And you can still see their Sabbath school lessons. And whenever I go to a church, I look at the Sabbath school lessons in the foyer, because sometimes you see one and it looks almost identical to ours, but you look at the publisher and it's from the Reformed Seventh-day Adventist Church in Italy or somewhere. So you know that they almost copy ours. But that split is still there. And then when Lenin came to power in the Soviet Union, at first he was sympathetic to the Adventists because many had been imprisoned by the Tsar. And he said, well, you know what political oppression looks like. Maybe you'll be on the side of the Bolsheviks. Well, the Adventists were not communists. And so Lenin initially promised some kind of religious liberty, but then he withdrew that very quickly. And in 1924, at the All-Soviet Adventist Congress, the Soviets pressured the Adventist Church leadership to change its position on conscientious objection, because it used to be that we said we're conscientious objectors. And then in 1924, they were pressured to say, now it's an individual conscience decision. The church has no position. Then in 1928, there was more pressure from the Soviets, and the Adventist Church changed its position again and said, now we encourage our young men to sign up for the Red Army. And so in Russia, and even to this day in countries like Vietnam, the big issue was Sabbath attendance on school attendance on the Sabbath. And so in the official church, the official Adventists, they went to school on the Sabbath, and the unofficial said no. They became known as the True and Free Adventists, and they're led by an old pastor called Victor Shelkoff. And so you had an official Adventist church and an unofficial church for about 60 years. And Shelkoff was eventually arrested by the KGB in about 1980. And he was sentenced to hard labor in a Siberian prison camp. He was in his upper 80s. And a lot of people appealed to him. Andrei Sakharov, who was a dissident. Alexander Solzhenitsyn appealed for his release. The US government appealed for his release, but he was imprisoned in Siberia and he died a couple of months later of overwork and starvation. So what happened was the official Adventists, their kids could finish school because they went to school on Sabbath, and the unofficial Adventists could never finish school. And that social division, the impact of 3 generations of that in your family line is profound. And even today, there are countries like Vietnam, where the official there's an official and an unofficial Adventist church. And the officials send their school on Sabbath when it's required, and the unofficials don't. And so that dynamic is still going on, at least in NAM today. And in Hitler's Germany, the church apologized, I don't know, 15 years ago for what we did with Hitler. But in Adolf Hitler's Germany, we said he's a vegan, he's almost like us. That was before the Holocaust, okay? He's almost like one of us. We downplayed the Sabbath. We encouraged our men to sign up for the Wehrmacht, the German army, and we also disciplined Jewish members. And that was to appease Adolf Hitler. And so we did not have a good record in Hitler's Germany. Now, after World War II, everybody in Germany knew which churches had collaborated with Hitler. The Jehovah's Witnesses had not. So the Jehovah's Witnesses experienced rapid growth in post-World War II Germany. We've just been stagnant because people know where you stood when you faced totalitarianism. The Jehovah's Witnesses were firmly opposed to Adolf Hitler in a way that we were not, at least in the 1930s. So if you look at General Pinochet in Chile, you look at General Galtieri's junta in Argentina, as a general rule, whenever there's a totalitarian regime, we seek to preserve our institutions at all costs. And oftentimes that leads to splits within the membership because of the ethical decisions or the decisions that leaders are being forced to make. And we've just lived through something like that in the last 3 years in the United States. All right. And we have taken decisions that have preserved our institutions, but have thrown many Adventists under the bus. And this is something that's going to take time to heal. The problem is the church leadership simply won't recognize this is what they've done. So only time will tell, and we just pray for change of heart. You know, whether you're vaxxed or not, we can all be in the Lamb's Book of Life. And I think it's important that we realize that the last 2 or 3 years was a dry run for the final crisis. And whatever decisions we made, we can all do better next time around, regardless of where we stood. We can all look back and say, this is how I'd made my decisions. This was the pressure the world really did have on me. These are the gods in my life that really caused me to struggle with those decisions. And it's time for me to get rid of those gods from my life, because in the final analysis, there can be no other God but Jesus Christ. And so it doesn't matter whether you're or not. We should be condemned for that decision. The question is, what are we learning from that for the final crisis? One of the things I'm learning is that you're on your own. Okay, it doesn't matter where your membership is, doesn't matter what union you're in. When push comes to shove and the mark of the beast is imposed, the conferences, unions, and the division of GC will be frozen financially. They'll be meaningless. Okay, and because we live in a polarized world, our church, our conference presidents and union leaders, they say almost nothing in public these days. They don't preach about anything because they're afraid of being attacked. If I preach, it's ridiculous. If you say today on Facebook, I love Apple, then somebody's going to say, why didn't you mention apple, oranges or mangoes? You're shaking with anger that you're orange phobic and banana phobic. No, I just like apples, you know. So it's kind of a silly way to illustrate, but that's the kind of ridiculousness that we're now dealing with. So because there's such polarization, our church leaders are saying as little as possible, in fact, nothing most of the time. And into that vacuum, that's when preachers stand up and speak. And so, you know, whether it's Walter Veith or whether it's myself or it's, you know, Pastor Doug Batchelor or other people, there is a vacuum in the public sphere, in the marketplace of ideas. You don't have church leaders talking about transgenderism or same marriage or abortion or anything like that, because they're terrified of the division it's going to cause. So because our church leaders are silent in the face of polarized society, and I don't blame them for that, that means there's an open field for preachers to stand up and say things on the internet. So I would just encourage us to be thinking, how did you make your decisions in the last 2 years? Who are the people that you trusted? Who can you trust with real secrets? Who's going to stand by you in your hour of need? If you look at your congregation here today, do you really know the people to the left or the right, in the pew in front, the pew behind? Do you know who they are? Do you know where they live? Do you pray for them, with them? Are you vulnerable with them? Do they know what they can be praying for on your behalf? Because when push comes to shove, the Adventist church, what it means is this group of people living in this county. It doesn't matter what happens in South Africa or in South Korea or in Indonesia or Bulawayo, Botswana. Okay, it doesn't matter. What matters is your Adventist brothers and sisters in your congregation. Do you know them? Do you love them? Do you trust them? Do you support each other? Do you look out for each other? So therefore, build your relationships within your local church. That's what matters at the end of the day. If there's another crisis, do you think the union office is going to help you? No. Is the division going to help you? No. They're all fighting their battles. It doesn't matter whether you are, what title you have. The world doesn't care about that. Everybody's fighting their battles. So build relationships of love and trust and spiritual authenticity with your brothers and sisters where you are now. Because when push comes to shove, that's all we've got in a crisis. Is that right, Pastor? Amen. Amen. Yes. Thank you.
I want to say other things that what we addressed here.
Yeah.
And that is, be careful how you think about the leadership, because oftentimes
Yeah.
they say they're at their own battle, and they don't amount to much as far as you think they have some status or fear or sphere. They don't count for anything, even though they may be our conference president. In the world at large, they're a small fish in a big pond,
Yeah.
and their opinion is not counted for, not asked for oftentimes.
It's true. It's true. And to be fair to our leaders, you have to ask yourself, what do we vote for as members? Like when you have a constituency session in your conference, if you have an academy in your conference and it closes in that 4-year cycle for that president, there'll be immense pressure to remove that president at the next session. All the alumni gather together. So our presidents are under immense pressure to protect our institutions, like our camp meetings and our academies. And if it closes on that president's watch, they're often done for. So what we vote for as members through our delegates, that sends a message to those who are elected to leadership positions. This is what we value. And generally speaking, we don't elect people who are known to be truth tellers in the public sphere. We elect people who are known to be a safe pair of hands who keep our institutions going. So, yeah, we have a question here, then a question over here, sister. Yes.
Comment on the state of the church in China, if you know anything.
Yeah, so China's a fascinating case study. There's CHUM, is the China Union Mission. It's based in Hong Kong. And Pastor Bob Falkenberg was the president there for many years. He did a really good job. He's almost fluent in Mandarin, and he did a really good job. The challenge with CHUM is that China, as far as the church is concerned, is known as the UT. That means the unorganized territories. It's unorganized in the sense that they don't have conferences and unions that relate to the general conference in the way that we have around the rest of the world. But the idea that China is unorganized is completely wrong. If you look at the history of the Chinese house church movements from the 60s and 70s onwards, these are highly organized movements. They're run along military scale lines. They're often owned by family businesses. And they have a very hierarchical, very much command and control structure. Many of them are led by women. They're prayer warriors. And so the idea that China is unorganized is kind of not really true. They're organized from the Adventist church's perspective. Now, the church in China has the Shai Pai and the Shai Pai. These are the new theology and the new theology. They don't have any formal pastoral training, and because of that, they've got their theology is kind of all over the place, and they keep splitting along theological lines. And so the church in China does need the help of the wider church to kind of solidify their theology and make it more, you might say, systematic. You might say this is what we believe from Scripture. But the church in China, they've had a lot of persecution. And in China, you have what is known as the Three Self Church. So the Chinese government says we want an indigenous Chinese church that is self-financing, self-organizing, and self-theologizing. It cannot have Western influence. So like nowadays, we have the war on drugs, yeah? We're trying to stop drugs coming into America, allegedly, all right? So back in the 1800s, Britain fought 3 wars against China, known as the Opium Wars, because we wanted to open China up for heroin exports from India. It was so profitable for the British Empire. We fought 3 wars to force China to open up their ports so that Britain could export heroin into China. So these drug wars go one way than the other way, depending which century you look at it. Now, the Chinese didn't like foreign involvement, so historically, the West caused some pain in China. So they have this 3 self-patriotic church. And so in China, you can have a beautiful Adventist church that seats 5,000 people. And the local government gives permission for that. And it's a thriving Adventist church. And then there's and he wants to impose a more hardline communism on his city so that Adventist church gets knocked to the ground, and 5 years later it gets rebuilt when a new governor comes along. So a fascinating case study, but the underground Chinese church, because they're incredible stories of faith, and prayer was what drove it, prayer and evangelism. And they didn't worry about structure or policies, they just worried about sharing the gospel. And millions of Chinese Christians have perished of all denominational backgrounds in the camps, and there are still Chinese in the camps in China. So that's really a terrible thing that, that we still live with. But the work in China is still ongoing, and there are now more Chinese Christians than there are Chinese communists. So there are more people who identify as Christian than as the Chinese Communist Party. So China is now probably the world's largest Christian country. We don't think of it in those terms. It has more Christians than anywhere else on planet Earth. And I think that if communism collapses, China will be a major source of energy for world missions, because they have this B2J vision, which is called Back to Jerusalem. So the Chinese say that if this is Israel here, the gospel went east, 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 and east all the way to China. Now they want to take the gospel through all those Muslim lands between China and Israel. They want to go back to Jerusalem. So there are many, many Chinese missionaries, and you can look tonight, Google Back to Jerusalem. They have some excellent training materials. They're in English, and it's from this Back to Jerusalem movement where Chinese of all denominations are trying to launch as missionaries to take the gospel between China and Israel, which is mostly the Middle East and Saudi Arabia and Southeast Asia. So even though they're facing persecution, it's a very, very missionary-minded church at this broadest level. So check it out, Back to Jerusalem. It's interesting. I'll come to you in a second, sister. You're after this lady here, okay? Oh, after the brother here. All right, here. All right, yeah.
That's fascinating about
Yeah.
China. I had no idea. We just keep waiting for it to open up, and we thought, well, we'll go over and evangelize, but it sounds like they're coming this way.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you were talking about prayer and how important it is for each one of us. How can we pray for you and your family?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I was just asking, pray morning and evening, bracket my day with prayer. Because when the attacks come, they're not made in public, they're not done in open, but it comes behind your back, and you know it's happening. And pray for my children, because they see the attacks. And so far they're solid in their faith, but yeah, it's going to affect them sooner or later. So I would just say, pray when you get up in the morning, when you go to bed. Just bracket your day, and so you can bracket my day with prayer as well, because we're involved in a spiritual battle, and there's collateral damage when you're involved in a spiritual battle. And we talk about, let's say, Martin Luther and these heroes of faith from the past, but we tend to forget that around them there was a huge movements of social upheaval, like the Peasants' Revolt in Germany, and he was blamed for that. The Lutherans were, and so you may find yourself being blamed for things that you never intended, never wanted. But I get told, for instance, that all around the world people are using my preaching to attack the General Conference. I said, well, that's not what I intended. My position is, if a husband is beating his wife and the wife raises her hand and says, would you please stop beating me? She's not to be blamed for raising her hand and saying, please stop beating me. So when I raise my hand and say to the church leaders, you are hurting your members with this statement, I'm not attacking them. I'm simply saying, would you please stop hurting us? We never signed up for this. And you don't have the right to make that determination about what we do to our own bodies. And but so far, there is an utter unwillingness to even talk about it. I think there is a general prayer or hope that we can just all put this behind us or disappear down the memory hole, but it's not going to disappear down the memory hole. So please just keep my family morning and evening, just prayer for my wife and I and our 2 children, that we'll retain a sweet spirit. Because when you're involved in battle all the time, you become jaded. And when people listen to you talking about things, I've gone through a year of some pretty intense battle, and it kind of changes how you talk and how you relate to things. And people think, oh, he's sounding like angry or jaded or cynical. No, I've just gone through an immense battle for a year, and it does affect you. It does affect you. So, yeah, just pray for us to have a sweet spirit. Yeah, thank you, sister. Thank you. Okay, brother here, then sister here.
Yeah, based on the financial situation that's taking place, the digital dollar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you advise us about how do we spend our money from now on? Should we still look to the, you know what I'm talking about, or we should more or less put it elsewhere?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So what you're referring to is the CBDCs that are coming. So for those of you who are unaware, we all have fiat currencies now. Fiat is Latin, it means let it be. And the pound, the dollar, the euro, the yen, the peso, the euro, they're all fiat currencies. And they're all being inflated out of existence by the central banks. The central banks know that when you increase the money supply, every time they print $1 trillion, the value of your dollar goes down in your pockets. So if you're a retiree on fixed income, every time the government passes $1 trillion bill, you've lost value. And it doesn't just affect your money, it affects you are devalued as a human being, because if it used to cost you 1 hour of your labor to, let's say buy a meal for your family, now it's going to cost 1 hour and 15 minutes of your time to buy a meal for your family. So with inflation. So that means that your time is now worth less. And you reach the point where your time is literally worthless. That means that nothing you have is of value as a human being. So inflation affects you in many ways. So the Western governments know this, and they're shifting to CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, which are a bit like, do you have like these food stamps in Tennessee, where people get like these cards from the government and they can buy certain foods, EBT? Yeah. So a central bank digital currency is essentially like that, and the government can program what you are and are not allowed to spend it on. So it used to be with EBT, you could buy corn chips, but you couldn't buy organic soy. You couldn't buy organic potatoes. Like the government has these ridiculous rules about these things. So when we go to CBDCs, and this is going to be within the next 12 to 24 months, it's going to hit us whether we like it or not. Our dollars are going to be transferred into digital dollars. And then the federal government now controls every transaction you make. They can refuse every transaction you make. And they're openly talking, let's say in Europe, they're talking about the maximum you can have in your bank account is 3,000 digital euros. So what they're doing is they're saying you can't save in this society anymore. If you can't save, you can never achieve financial independence. You're basically a slave to the system. Okay? Because in Europe, 3,000 euros won't get you through 1 month of expenses. So if you can't have more than 3,000 euros in your digital bank account, you are a slave for the rest of your life. Number two, they can program it, and they're openly talking about this, that they will program it so you can only spend on what the Bank of England calls socially desirable activities. So you can spend on, going to the Cincinnati Bengals. I've got nothing against the Bengals, okay, but you may not be able to spend it on great controversies or desire of ages. Or the Bible may be deemed transphobic or homophobic, and you can't buy that on Amazon. So once you go to central bank digital currencies, the government has oversight and determination over every transaction you make. If you have a child and you say, go and mow the lawn, and they say, well, how much is that going to cost, Dad? And you say, $5. Right now, you put your hand in your pocket and give him $5. But when those dollars no longer exist, you've got to pay him with a CBDC transaction, like a Cash App or something like that. But then that's taxed by the government. So there is no informal economy anymore. Everything is taxed. And when you have these central bank digital currencies, they can do haircuts. So a haircut, we had one in Europe in 2007. The Greek economy was in a terrible state. And in order to suck money out of the Greek economy, the European Central Bank took about 10% of everybody's bank accounts, just disappeared overnight. That's called a haircut. So the government can force you to spend money. They can take your money from you, and they can impose negative interest rates on you, which means that if you want to have your 3,000 digital euros in the bank, that's fine, but we're going to charge you 1% a day for keeping it there. That's forcing you to spend your money as soon as you get it. So this is where, at the moment, if the government wants you to spend money, they'll lower interest rates and you borrow more. With digital currencies, they'll just take money from your account unless you spend it. So you're going to spend it immediately. So what we're looking at in the West is a massive transfer of economic power to the government. And Biden signed the EO in March this year, March, April. It's in the Federal Register. I did a talk about this on Med Missionary just recently. It's all in the public sphere. Most Adventists are not thinking about these things, but it's coming really fast. Now, the British are doing it. The Chinese already have a version. The European Union's doing it. Nigeria has just put a $45 a day limit on what you can take out of your account. They're forcing people to go to the Nigerian digital currency. So even though the money is yours in the bank, you can't take it out. They're forcing you to transfer across. So we're looking at a huge transfer of power to the government, and every transaction you make will be known, and they can turn it on or turn it off, like Trudeau did with the truckers' convoy up north earlier this year. So then that's what's happening. Can we do anything about it? The blunt answer is no. Nothing we do about that. I mean, the change is going to take place. So then the question is, what do you do with your resources now while you have the freedom to use them? Use them for things that you suspect are going to be illegal sometime in the future. All right, gospel work. Okay, when we're off the internet, the one thing we'll have left is literature. Invest in literature. Glow tracts, Great Controversies, Steps to Christ. Even if you've got stockpiles in your basement, okay, it's a good thing, because there's going to come a time when we can't buy those things and give them out. So invest in gospel work. If you're going to a Cuban mission trip, if you're going to a Cuban missile trip, all right. Yeah, you heard it here. Yeah, there's a Cuban missile trip from this church. If you're going on the Cuban mission trip, and there's a young family who wants to go, or a kid who wants to go, sponsor that kid. Okay, put your money to use for God's work now, because there's going to come a time when you can no longer do so. So, and that time of freedom is fast coming to an end. The beta version for the retail version, the Fed dollar, comes out in May, June next year. I mean, the time scale's already in the public arena. The digital stuff is already happening in the clearing banks at the wholesale banking level, but it just hasn't hit you yet. And it's coming your way fast. Nothing we can do about it. So invest in gospel work while you can. Okay. The beta version of the federal dollar, the digital federal dollar. Beta is like a test version. And they'll have things like, and because they can just create this money at the touch of a button, they'll have incentives. Say to people, yeah. Yeah. And this last year, we all got federal stimulus checks. When you signed up for a federal stimulus check, you gave the federal government your bank account details. They know your bank account. And so when they switch over to the digital currency, there's almost certain going to be what they call customer acquisition costs, which is if you sign up for digital currency in the first 2 months, you get 10,000 digital dollars. Everybody's going to rush for it. And then once you're in, it's like Twitter. At first it looks good, but then the censorship clamps down on you. That's what's going to go with the digital dollar. Wait. We'll come to that in a second, brother. We have a sister here who's been waiting patiently. Then we'll come back to you and then to you, brother.
Okay, well, it's a little different topic, but I was wondering, what is the most difficult area of the world, like specific place in the world to evangelize? What is the method that you know of that would be best for that? And what can we do here where we are to help with that?
All right, so the two most difficult parts of the world to evangelize, well, there are three. There's Chechnya, there's North Korea, and there's Mogadishu, Somalia. And so those are the three most closed parts of the world. And you would not want to go to any of those three places. In fact, you probably couldn't go to any of those three places. In the Muslim world, the best way for the gospel to go there is Jesus, Muslims, and dreams and visions, and invite him to follow him. The book of Revelation that we have in our books is being seen in visions every night around the Muslim world. And we have the book in our hands, and Muslims don't have access to it. Let's say in Chechnya, they don't have Bibles there, but they get visions of Jesus that are straight from the book of Revelation. And so we can be praying for Muslims who are having dreams of Jesus. We run a program that reaches out to Muslims who have dreams of Jesus. They connect with us every day in multiple languages. And the people who staff it are mostly former Muslims who know what it's like to make that transition. And it's a difficult work. The people who lead it get death threats throughout the night, every night. That's at AFM. It's something that our staff have to deal with because it's making a big impact. We track the number of denial of service attacks on our websites. We get about 11 million denial of service attacks per hour on our websites. 11 million. So on an average day, we could have like 40 or 50 million attacks on our websites to try and take them down. So yeah, this tells you how angry some people are out there that Muslims are connecting with us and finding Jesus Christ. So yeah, that's what you can do from here. Well, sister, half the Muslim world currently identifies as female, and you're a lady, at least I think you are. I don't want to assume your gender here, okay? And so I can never speak to a Muslim woman, but you can. And there are Muslim women around the world who are looking for God-fearing Christian women who will lead them into God's kingdom. So you could sign up as a full-time missionary among Muslim women, and you spend the rest of your life doing that ministry. And we have plenty of married and single women doing that for AFM right now. So it's a massive need out there. Mogadishu, Chechnya, North Korea. Yeah. All right, we're going to come to you, sister. I see your hand is up. Say brother here, then a brother here, then sister over here. All right, so brother here.
Okay, I happened to run into this video. It's called the Your Digital Prison. And
What?
it touches the digital prison.
Okay.
And it's pretty much, it was one of the videos that I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but as I watched it, I couldn't stop watching it. Because the man, Mr. Aman Javi, he goes in detail, like when everything started with the cell phone, your face recognition, that's all being saved.
Yeah.
He's an expert on the subject, and he explained pretty much from how we started and where it's taking us now, and how far it has gone, that it's been noticed by the average person. He mentions that...
so what's the question?
The question is, do you see this already taking part, as he's saying?
Yes.
I want to confirm it. Okay, so it's confirmed. And the other part is like, interesting that he's not a Seventh-day Adventist, he's non-Christian, but he mentioned, I have Christian friends that talk about the beast. And guess what? That is the beast.
Well, there was a young boy said to President Obama on the hustings, he said, Mr. President, he said, my daddy says that you're corrupt. And President Obama listened. And the boy said, Mr. President, my dad says that you have bad policies. And President Obama listened. The boy said, Mr. President, my dad says you ain't going to be reelected. And President Obama looked at the boy and said, son, I have bad news for you. He says, he's not your dad. So that's kind of a joke, all right? But it illustrates the extent of government knowledge of who you are. Now, every time you click on an ad, every time you linger for a fraction of a second on something online, that is recorded, and there's a profile built up about you. When I get on a plane from Chicago to Armenia, I don't have to show my passport. I just got to stand in front of a camera, and it scans my face and says, you are who you say you are. You have the right to get on this plane. What we have with the fourth industrial revolution is that all of the banking and ID and retail and wholesale and government bank internet sites are all becoming interlinked. So something happens over here and everything else knows about it. And so you can be put on a no-fly zone, no-fly list without knowing about it. You fly on a mission trip to Cuba, check out the missiles there, and you try and get home, and you can't get on the plane. You're on a no-fly list, and there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, we are. There are two kind of totalitarian systems. Like George Orwell wrote 1984, and he envisaged like the Soviet form of totalitarianism where people live in absolute poverty. But Aldous Huxley wrote about another form of totalitarian system, the Brave New World, where we are so saturated with entertainment and wealth, we don't realize we're prisoners in a gilded cage. And that's where we've gone in America. So every time you transfer your personal information, every time you look at an ad, every time you sign up for something, every time you buy something, advertisers are building a profile about you, and it's not just the advertisers. So where this is going is, look what's happening in China with their social credit scheme. So they have cameras, like in cities of Urumqi, where the Uyghurs are, in the Shangjing province. They've got a camera every 100 meters, and they know your rat run. And if you walk home this way, and the computer expects your message like, what are you doing? And when you buy, you have to have a QR code put in the knife, because they don't have gun killings, they have knife killings, far more than we have gun killings in America. And when you buy a knife, they put a laser with a QR code into the knife blade, so you're responsible for what happens to that knife. So in China, you have a social credit system, and we're moving that way in America. We call it cancel culture. If you speak up about certain things, you're going to get canceled. If you work for the state of Tennessee and say, I believe in marriage is a biological man and a biological woman, you're going to be fired. You work for Coca-Cola, you're going to be terminated, all right? We have this social credit system, and we now know that everything you say will be taken down and used in evidence against you, not necessarily by the police, but by social justice warriors, internet archaeologists with a vendetta against you. Now dig something up from 15 years ago, and that'll cause you to lose your job today. Now, because of that, we're all self-censoring. Nobody's willing to speak out in public anymore about anything, because we know it's going to get used against you. What is considered norm today is considered hate speech tomorrow. And because we see this change happening so fast, very, very few people are willing to stand up and say, this is what we believe as Adventists, or this is what the Word of God says. And because it's going to be used against you, even within, there's just as much friendly fire, let's put it that way, as unfriendly fire. Yeah. Brother here.
I was asking about stocks and bonds and stuff like that isn't actually money in your bank account. How's that affected by this digital currency transfer?
Well, the valuation will probably be in digital dollars. Yeah, it'll come out in a different form. Yeah. But I think that the way the stock markets work is changing as well with the ESG index. We're moving towards a shareholder economy, a stakeholder economy rather than a shareholder economy. This is what the Great Reset is all about. So at the moment, if you own a share in Ford, the board has a fiduciary duty, a legal duty to maximize the value for the shareholders. That's who the board manages on behalf of the shareholders. That's why when Elon Musk wanted to buy Twitter, he made an offer like a 10% premium on the share price. Even though the board hated Elon Musk, they had a legal duty to recommend the sale to their shareholders because they have a legal duty to do that. And now we're moving from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder, and in stakeholder capitalism, the board of Ford has to manage for the mangrove suppliers and the mangrove swamp owners in Indonesia and the iron ore range in northern Minnesota, those guys, and for the shipping companies that traverse with the iron ore from Lake Superior around to the steel mills of Pittsburgh. And they've got to manage for the racial, the ethnic, the sexual, the environmental groups, all of which have an interest in Ford Motor Corporation, which means that they basically, they call the ESG index, environmental, social, and governance indicators. And so the boards are no longer managing in the interests of the shareholders, they're managing in the interests of much wider, like cultural Marxist ideologies that are taking place. And so there's becoming a disconnect between the corporations and the owners. Now, what happens is you can change your president, at least theoretically in an election, but you can't change the president of Ford Motor Corporation. There's no mechanism for you or I to change Ford Motor Corporation president. So these corporations, when they become agents of the state, you can't change those corporations. They have a massive impact on you, which is why it used to be in America that people wanted to get a job in a gleaming office in Cincinnati or New York. Now, I'd say young people, think about the trades. You can be self-employed, self-financing, self-supporting. There's no boss to tell you what you have to put in your body or not. And you are 100% free. It's an honorable thing to do to become a carpenter, plumber, contractor, engineer, and all the rest of it, okay? There's no mandates. You can't mandate for those guys or those ladies. So, Jesus was a carpenter, all right? He wasn't a corporate executive. So, it's an honorable thing, and with the mandates, the safest place to be to honor your conscience is a self-employed contractor. So young people, think about that. Think about that. We have a question back here.
Yes, I just wanted to make one comment. Just wanted to make one comment in regards to the Muslims. Another way that they're being led to Christ is through lifestyle centers in Nigeria. Particularly one that I know of in Ibadan. Many Muslims are converting just because they're being healed using natural remedies.
And actually, Islam is in an existential crisis right now. So the ruler of Saudi Arabia is a guy called Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. You've seen him in the news? Well, early last year, he did an interview, and he said, and this it's like divided the whole Muslim world. He said, okay, so Islam, you have the Quran, then you have the Hadith, those are the sayings of Muhammad, and when those are combined, they're combined into what is known as Sharia law. Okay, so the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sharia. And he is the leader of the Sunni world. The Sunnis follow the Sunnah of Muhammad. The Sunnah are his sayings, his Hadith. And what he said was, he says, most of those Hadith are not true. And we know they ain't true. And the interview was like, could you say it again, Crown Prince? And he said, I'm saying it again. We know those Hadith are not true. And this sent shockwaves to the Muslim world. And then he went on to say, we need to eliminate most of those Hadith, and we need to just really go back to the Quran. And he said, and no Hadith should be accepted unless it's directly quoting from the Quran. That's called the Hadith Qudsi in Arabic, a holy Hadith. And this has caused utter division in the Adventist world. This is like Elder Ted Wilson standing up and saying, you know, what Sister White said, she didn't have the gift of prophecy. We should not accept any of her writings. All the doctrines she endorsed need to be set aside. This would cause shockwaves. I mean, it's that kind of level of shock. And this has divided the Muslim world in the last 2 years like nothing has before. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a young lady called Hatun Tash. And you can go look on YouTube for Hatun Tash Ministries. She was a Muslim. She went to Morocco to teach some language. And she went into a store and she said, I want an Arabic Quran for my students. And he said, which version? Like, what do you mean, what version? There's only one Quran. The number one proof for Islam is the miraculous preservation of the Quran. And they said, no, we have 4 Arabic versions here. They said, what do you mean 4 Arabic versions? And she says, well, this is approved by this Islamic authority, and this is approved by this Islamic authority. So she bought them up and discovered they're actually quite different. So she started traveling the world and came up with about 26 or 30 different Qurans in existence today. So she became a Christian because the number one proof for Islam disappeared. So she now goes to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London, where you can say anything without fear of being sued. And she has a big stand with all these Qurans up there, and she's surrounded by young men from Somalia. And she says, so which Quran do you guys follow? Now, this has caused rage in the Muslim world. About last summer, she was attacked with a meat cleaver. They almost took her head off. It was all captured on YouTube. And miraculously, she survived, and she's back at it out there. She's about 5 foot tall. Her name is Hatun Tash. Hatun Tash, Tash. Now, her voice is like really great. But she's like a little pit bull, and she really goes for it. And then there's an excellent YouTube channel called Fanda Films, which talks about this crisis in Islam. It's by Dr. J. Smith, and he's one of the leading apologists for the gospel vis-a-vis Islam right now. So Fanda Films is P-F-A-N-D-E-R, Fanda, it's a German spelling, Fanda Films. But the bottom line is this: it was 3 years ago, Islam seems to be on the rise. It's now stuck, and it's starting to fall apart. And where are they going to go? And look what's happening in Iran. If the mullahs fall, Iran will become a Christian nation. There's huge interest in Christianity in Iran. So it's not just a political battle, it's a spiritual battle going on there. And so keep the Muslim world in your prayers, because the fact that Jesus appears to Muslims in dreams and visions tells us, and he invites them to follow me, that must be our attitude as well. Okay? And where are Muslims going to go when they want to find Jesus? They need to come here. They need to be made welcome here. And we need to love them as brothers and sisters. All right? So we need to kind of recalibrate. We are not citizens so much of this world, but citizens of God's kingdom. And we're to replicate the values of his kingdom. If you don't know what those are, read the Beatitudes. So, brother here.
So I would like to applaud all the ladies that play such a wonderful part in the kitchen today.
Amen.
Yes, they did a great job. They did a great job. Now, my question, I know for sure, and I'm going to make sure I spell this out. I know for sure this is way above my league, above my pay grade.
Yes.
But if all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted, and an invitation is being sent out, asking you to come back for like a long weekend, Friday, Sabbath, Sunday.
Oh, yes.
Would you say yes?
We cannot set you up.
No, brother, no. Yeah. I mean, people ask me to come. I'm booked up to like the end of 24 right now. So that's pretty much every weekend is gone for about 2 years. So at this stage, I'm not taking bookings in 25, but what I say to people is, I've got like a list on my desk. If a weekend falls through for whatever reason, then I give somebody a call. But I'm very humbled you should ask that, Brother Meshach. The last year has been pretty tough, and for all of us. And when you feel like you're the tip of the spear, a lot of nonsense comes your way. And, you have to be very intentional about being as gracious as possible, because it's easy to allow cynicism or anger to take over. So people want me to come and speak about certain issues, and I want to speak about missions, because that's what my life work is. And, I find myself, I know all these guys at the GC, and I've worked with them for many years. I consider them my friends, but something happened in the last year. And I've come to the conclusion that I will not be a company man. As a pastor, I'm supposed to be a shepherd of the flock. And if the flock are suffering, then you've got to stand up for your flock. So I would love to come back, Brother Meshach, but it's going to have to be if something drops out in the next 2 years, because I hardly spend any time at home as it is now. Every Sabbath is spoken for about 2 years.
Amen for that.
Thank you. All right.
My question is this: with all that is going on with the artificial intelligence and what they're doing with the currency and whatnot, what part does a civil war play, or when is it supposed to outbreak? Because I believe that people are going to stand against certain things. Where do you see that?
Yeah, so it's in the 5th manuscript releases. There's a quote in 1899. And I don't have the reference off my head, but it's on my phone, which is switched off in my bag. Sister White says, I see that in the cities of India, China, and America, people are dying of starvation. She says the moneyed classes, they control the supply of food, and they raise the price so the poor cannot buy food. And this will lead to starvation in all the cities of these countries, and this will lead to a civil war. And she's talking about America, and she wrote this in 1899. So this is not talking about the American Civil War in the 1860s. So you ask yourself, do we see income inequality in America today? Absolutely. The top 1% of the American economic elites own pretty much everything else. And we basically work for them one way or the other. And young people can't get ahead economically. They find it hard to get a house. And if you can't get a house, you can't get a job, you have no stake in society. So why would you contribute positively to it? So we have massive income inequality. Look, I'm not a Marxist or a socialist, but for societies to exist, people need to they need to be able to live and have their basic needs met, and not be ground into poverty. And it's not right that you do 40 honest hours labor a week and still have to take a second job just to pay your rent. Something's not right in a system that forces that on anybody. You should be able to do an honest week's work and provide for your family. All right. And I'm not a Marxist, okay? I'm not a socialist, but your labor is worth something. And so when the value of your labor is devalued by large corporations and the extremely wealthy, so you're basically working just to get the gasoline to go to work and back, and you're falling behind, just living, you're falling behind. This is going to lead to a social explosion one day. So Sister White talks about it. She doesn't say when it's going to happen, but if you ask yourself, do we have income inequality? Yes. Do we have hungry children in America now? Yes, we do. Is hunger a problem across many of the 50 states? Yes, it is. And even when people have their fill with calories, they're empty calories, because we have nutritional deserts in our cities, and people can't get access to nutritional food, but they're fed with corn chips, which are subsidized by the federal government, which is junk food. And the whole system almost conspires against the working poor. They can never get healthy, and they never get ahead, because all the systems that conspire against them. So I don't know when that's going to happen, sister, but Sister White talks about it, that one day there'll be a civil war, and so I believe that's going to happen. So I'm not a socialist, all right? Just me. I've seen the damage of socialism. Yeah, sister, and then a brother here. Then we'll have to bring this to a close.
Good evening, my dear brother.
Good evening, sister.
I just want you to know I appreciate you so much
Well, thank you. Yeah.
because you have brought my family through some
Mhm.
trying times.
Yeah,
My
thank you.
son
Yeah.
lost his job
Mhm.
because of his choice.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you standing up. Okay, on a lighter note, I just wanted to know that I have the ministry of the scammers. And last week, one called me and he asked me, I was telling him about Jesus. And he says, I am a Muslim. What do you think about Muslims? So I just like to ask you, what is a good answer to give to such a question?
I think that many Muslims are devout and pious, and when Jesus speaks to them, they make the best possible Christians. I would also say to them that you're not a Christian, but you're a Seventh-day Adventist. And God has an end-time movement waiting for the descent of Isa. Descent of Isa is how the second coming is referenced in the Quran and the Hadith, the descent of Isa. And you are waiting for the descent of Isa, and God is preparing a final people who are pure in heart and pure in deed, and you want your friend to be part of that group as well. Because if you say, I'm a Christian, they're going to think you eat pork, drink alcohol, and are sexually immoral. So you cannot identify as a Christian. You are a Seventh-day Adventist. God has a remnant people who are faithful to him.
I did say to him, I'm a follower of Christ.
Yes. Amen, sister. Yes. And you can say to them, look, I found this website. It's called dreamsofisa.org. Check it out. I say, this is intriguing. Looks like Jesus appearing to Muslims in dreams. Ask them to look at the website and tell you what they think. Yeah. Yes, brother.
Oh, a couple of questions. Is address still a good option if somebody wanted to, be in, as you spoke about 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the other is, do you have any suggestions on where you would start in reaching, you were talking about the Muslim woman. Is that online or otherwise, or how would that work?
All right, so that's a good question. Two good questions. First is ADRA. I worked for ADRA for many years now. I have a soft spot in my heart for it. Look, some of the ADRA leadership comes out with certain political statements like the climate change stuff that's been going on recently. But on the ground, I've seen many times that ADRA provides legitimacy for the Adventist church to be in that community because it tangibly cares for people in their hour of need. So yeah, I think ADRA is worth supporting, yes. When it comes to your second question, and it was a great question, I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah, Muslim women and working with them. All right, so you have the largest Kurdish side of the Middle East in Nashville, 20,000+ Kurds. You have a 20,000+ Iraqi relocated to Chattanooga area. They are all looking for friendship. You have large Muslim community state now, very large, concentrated communities. And you can work online with people, but I would encourage you, Gabriella Phillips does a wonderful job as the NAD's Advent Muslim Relations Coordinator. And I would encourage you to reach out to her and talk about what you do in this portion of Tennessee, because there will be Muslims in this part of Tennessee. In any major town now, there will be a mosque. And you can do things like Muslims expect in the last week of Ramadan, it's called the week of power, that God will reveal himself to them. They're expecting a dream from God. So start praying that during Ramadan that the Muslims of that mosque will have dreams of Jesus. And if you connect with us at AFM, we'll run ads on social media and all those zip codes for the month of Ramadan, so that when they've had dreams of Jesus and they look on their Facebook page, oh, look, there's an ad that says, have you had a dream of Jesus? And they'll click on it. And that's how you reach people. And it costs you it's like a cent a click. So you pay $500 and you get 50,000 clicks for that. And it's ridiculously cheap. We can cover all of Chicago with adverts on Facebook for like $10 for a week. It's so cheap. It's the cheapest form of advertising there is. So you can connect with us and we can put ads on those zip codes for Muslims who've had dreams of Jesus. And they'll see it and click on it, and we can connect you with them. So there's a lot of things you can do. Yeah, okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Then that's going to be okay. I got to drive to Michigan tonight. All right. So who's this little lady here? Yeah. You sister with the headdress on.
So in reference to Muslims,
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, we had a Muslim lady to come for treatment at
Yeah.
our sanitarium.
Yeah.
Before we left, I had so many Bible studies with her because she's searching, because a lot of especially the women, they don't know what they believe. They've got to hear it from their husband that hears it from the imam, right? So they don't know what they believe. And so I think maybe after the 4th or the 5th day of her going through, different treatments, she came in the kitchen that morning and she said, I now know that Jesus is my healer, so God is working. And like you said, they're looking for people to speak with. They're looking for people. And I tell you, we have a lot of beliefs in the Adventist church that no other Christian denomination has. We are more aligned with the Islam nation as far as our beliefs are concerned than all the other Christian belief systems that are out there. If we would just hold to them, that's another way for them to look and say, wow, this woman is covered. Why is she dressing that? Oh, you have different, beliefs in your diet. Why do you? Because they will ask you those questions if we are able to minister to them in that way.
Thank you. Excellent point, sister. Brother, our elder here, who did the...
Yes.
Oh, okay.
My question is in regard to everything that's happening now about control.
Yeah.
And we have many of our families leaving the United States because they believe that that's the council, and the council about leaving the cities, and they think that they need to leave the United States. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's a quote from Ellen White that says there'll come a time when Adventists will regret not taking their chance to leave the United States. Now, I've read that. I mean, can't give you the reference right now. I think that the border wall not being completed in Texas is a good thing for Adventists, because one day we're going to have to want to cross it the other way, and we don't want a big border wall there, all right? So, but I do think that wherever you are in the world, we're living in such a connected era of interconnectedness that if you go to Morocco or to go to Algeria or you go to Indonesia, people can find you at the touch of a button. There's no way you can hide these days. And country living isn't going to protect you from a raid by some federal agency, but it prepares you spiritually for what those challenges are going to bring. So that's the main advantage of that kind of living.
We kind of made a research about that statement, and we even using the Ellen White estate, and it was mentioning that it was A.T. Jones, who made mention of that on a sermon to the General Conference, and that it was not Ellen White. I mean, and a lot of YouTube network preachers are, promoting, therefore, if you want to be safe and the days of trouble ahead, it's better to leave the United States and go to like third world countries where the system of control will be a lot less, so you can preserve your liberty of conscience, things of that nature. How do you feel? So, I mean, and when we know clearly, we read that the Lord was just telling us to not to stay in the big cities, to be in the country, because in reality, it is an act of faith. All protection is really from God, not just like the ark itself was not enough to cover Noah and his family. The angels of God had to hold the ark, based on the book called The Story of Redemption. And my conviction is that it's the same way. Our country living is not what's protecting us, but it's God who's going. His angels will take care of us. But we have that a lot, people promoting that leave the United States, leave Canada, leave France, leave Australia, go to third world countries.
Yeah, so the world is changing really fast. And as I mentioned earlier, say Nigeria is forcing everybody into the currency, and they're restricting what cash you can take out of account. That's Nigeria. The Eastern Caribbean already has Dcash, which is a central bank digital currency. They already have that in parts of the Caribbean. You go to parts, I won't say which parts of the world, but there are many parts of the world today where you may think you have more freedom, but no, you don't, because the police themselves, they can do to you what they want to do. And the reality is they can find you wherever you are, because you leave an electronic footprint. You can't avoid it. You know, if I get back at O'Hare sometimes, and I've made like an unexpected detour in some part of the Middle East. I get asked at O'Hare, like, when did you make that detour? There was no electronic transaction. I think, how do they know I did that? But they know. So, I think that you may go to rural Botswana and be horrified to discover that the systems of control are not the same we have in America, but they're just as effective. Just as effective. And in the legal system over there, you don't. Because like many parts of the world, at least, you rough you up, and that's the end of the matter. Yeah. So, we really need to bring this to a close. I think Pastor has a few words to say. Yeah, thank you.
Now, can you hear me? All right. Okay. Listen, I appreciate all of you coming. And it was a pleasure to have Brother Conrad here. I have followed a little bit of his ministry last couple of years and appreciated the value that he brings to us and the knowledge he has. And I appreciate especially AFM. We've helped a number of the missionaries over the years, and we read their magazine faithfully and their little ministries and stories and challenges they have. And I kind of laugh within myself a little bit at some of the questions we ask sometimes. It seems that the greatest concerns we have are me, mine, and ours, and my safety and comfort. And if that's what we're looking for in the age that we're living in, we're probably too late. I don't think there's anywhere in the world much to find it. As Brother Conrad, I think, agrees with us here. But we're all at one stage going to be frontline missionaries if we're faithful. And the thing, and I mentioned this to him earlier, we gather here and big throng for this part for an event when he comes. But how united are we when we're out there in the places where we are in our little institutions, our little homes and farms and whatever it is? The way the Lord said that the world is going to know who his people are is where our hearts are toward each other. And we have a little opportunity at this point to share a little bit as we take an offering here at the back for Brother Conrad and the ministry. But I want to challenge each of you. Try to find a way, whether it's the General Conference Brethren or anybody else, that we try to pull together and encourage each other. And I wonder if we're not the reason sometimes that the leadership don't make decisions a little better. Maybe they're not feeling our support and encouragement, or hearing from our hearts what we think they ought to do and how we'll stand behind them if they do the right thing. And so I want to encourage us to pull together. That's what Ellen White said over and over. As we see the Lord's coming, press together, press together, press together. And I liked what he said about, if we go some other place. I've told some of my young men, I had a young man tell me just not long ago, I'm going to join the military, and he was telling me about all the fantastic things the military has and how they can find people and that you can't hide. You got this infrared this and all this kind of stuff. And I said, I'll tell you something. The Army I'm in, I can be standing right beside the most well-equipped military unit in the world, standing right beside them. They can't even see me or touch me because my God is able. Amen. And remember, that's the God we serve. And for our confidence and our faith, And by the way, most of you in here are really rich. And if you went somewhere else in the third world country, they'd all know where you are, because you'd be the guy that's a rich guy. and so just again, appreciate you coming together and the opportunity to share, and I appreciate that you liked having Brother Conrad here, and if we can get him back, we will. And between now and then, support him with your prayers, and all the others out there that are working that don't have the face out front like he does, because a lot of the folks out there serving are the unnamed, unappreciated, unknown. And so we want to pray for all of those. Let's have a word of prayer as we close. I'm going to invite you, those of you can, to kneel with me. Brother Ryan, would you come over here? All right, if you kneel with me. Heavenly Father, here we are closing out this time. It's been a high time together. Brother Conrad has shared a lot of things with us and a lot of challenges. He's got a lot on his heart and his mind, and I just pray, Lord, that you give him peace. Give him wisdom above all else, Lord, because the challenge is the more you know, the more you say, the more you're seen, the greater the threat, both from without and within. So, Lord, you know how to humble him and keep him. Bless his family, bless his home, bless his work. He has leadership that extends around the globe. And so we pray for that, for his ministry. And as each one who's gathered here, Lord, we've come from our various places. A lot of places maybe we could be today, but we're here. And so we ask for your blessing upon us. And Lord, give us faithful and generous hearts. May we draw together in love as never before, knowing that your coming is soon. These last things are going to happen in a hurry. Probably we can't even plan fast enough to be ready for any of them. But just help us to be willing and ready, and according to your Spirit, to move our hearts and minds and our hands to do your work, to finish it, that we can soon go on with you. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're taking the love offering as you leave here. Just